No, we should. We're back. Okay, so you probably don't know we were gone, but we were gone for a smidge of a second. Facebook deletes these if you're on time. I don't know why, but they just like to be annoying. But here we are again. Excited to be with you. Okay, technology's working. We're good. Okay. But anyways, now that we've come through this, this week is heart awareness. I don't know, some sort of heart issue. Doesn't matter. We're going to talk about the heart, but in a different way. Okay. So, as you can tell, I got a little rush there, a little flustered, all going on. But we're going to talk about the heart. So, the heart actually tells you a lot, right? The heart is an organ, and lots of people think about like cholesterol and all this stuff as far as heart health, and that is important, right? But when when I look at a kid or maybe a parent that's coming in, I look at the heart in a different way. Like, how is it beating in essence? Like, like what is it telling me about the fight or flight system that Heather and I always talk about? And so, what is it telling me? And you get kids like I'm sure Heather. I'd love to hear your experiences too. But you get a kid in, and I'm talking. They're 9-year-old, right? And they seem calm on the wrist, but heart's beat 120, and you're like, what is going on? And or just all sorts of things you can just see, just all this stuff you can see by just looking at the heart rate and the rhythm and all this other stuff. We use technology that takes heartbeat, temperature of the skin, and sweat, and so it gives us what we call HRV. And this is so vital because Heather, chime in here, but I've had kids come in and they've seen everybody under the sun, and you take a look at them, you can see their skin is flushed, they have weird, maybe they're sweating a lot or not sweating at all. You check their heart rate, it's through the roof, and we do this test, and their autonomics are like on fire, as if a bear was in the room with them, but it's just me and mom and the kiddo. And so, what do you see as far as autonomic dysregulation, or whatever you want to call it? There's different terms out there. What do you see? I mean, do you see kids come in with high heart rates, or just abnormal sweating, like they're sweating too much or too little, or what do you see in your clinic?
Oh, yes. I mean, sweaty palms, sometimes body odor that begins at a younger age than what you would expect. Issues with digestion. The brain controls the heart. I mean, it's all tied to the nervous system, the sympathetic, parasympathetic system, which is that fight or flight. Tells our heart rate to speed up or slow down. And so individuals who have the startle reflex or who have regulation issues, emotional or any kind of self-regulation issues, often, body-brain connection, you're going to see it play out. There are physical manifestations that may seem innocuous, clammy palms, like you said, sweating too much or not enough. It gets hot very easily. Like if temperature regulation is off, these are right. Yeah. Temperature regulation is off. And when you just look at that in isolation, we've talked about the frog in the frying pan. There are certain things where you're just like, well, it's always been that way, so it must be okay. We just have to really think about the difference between common versus normal, and also pay attention to these things because it very likely can be a sign of something underneath. Heart rate is tied to depression and anxiety, and other mental health issues. Have you seen research about Alzheimer's? I know we normally gear these toward kids, but for the longest time you've heard, okay, there are differences in the brains of Alzheimer's patients, and it's like these protein tubulars get all tangled up, and that is Alzheimer's. Well, now research is suggesting, it's in the early stages, but it's really looking like heart rate, having that blood flow to the brain, keeps those protein tubules from getting tangled up. They're really saying that one of the best ways, we know that one of the best ways to fight dementia is exercise, and you're working on your heart rate variability. Interval training is really good because you're getting your heart to speed up and slow down. You're getting that body-brain connection going more.
So heart rate variability, so if you're curious what that is as the heart expands or contracts, essentially the lungs are doing the opposite. Okay. And so they're not in conflict with each other, right? So as you bring air in, your heart should be compressing or getting smaller. But when the heart and lungs are expanding at the same time, like when you see a lion or bear or whatever, when you're stuck in that fight or flight, when you need to get blood and oxygen going as fast as you can, that creates, we'll call it friction, right? And what it does is it puts stress on the heart essentially. Okay. And so, and the lungs and everything else. And so it's heart rate variability is a very good way of checking to see if there's a variation in that heartbeat. Like there should be variations. And what Heather said, it was, awesome. And I love everything she said, but she's talking about like kiddos who have maybe a lower threshold for regulation and control, right? Generally emotional regulation is kind of what a parent talk about threshold, right? Or sensory threshold, right? They're in school, there's sound, there's lights, I'm monitoring this all, and my system isn't able to regulate this all, or I have, like a hair, we call hair trigger, right? Where it just needs the slightest bit and so this is very important. And if you don't think I take this seriously, this is a textbook on the autonomic nervous system. I'm ready to go. Okay, so this is important, but digestion. I got kids that come in and they're always wearing hoodies. They're always, pants, long sleeves in the middle of the summer. They don't regulate temperature well. And then you see the opposite. Like me, I'm always hot. I mean, I'm wearing shorts right now. Okay. I am always hot. Okay. It's 50 degrees out. I wear shorts. I'm also from Wisconsin, so that plays a little bit of a role. But, I have the opposite, where I'm always warm. Okay. So, but that's important to look at, right? In that this is playing a massive role in our kids. But as Heather mentioned, Alzheimer's, I just read a research study that talked about symptomology or severity of COVID. Okay, so it plays a massive role in immune function, digestion, plays a role in attention and focus. And so really you can get a lot from how is this part of the nervous system functioning. And the best part is you can kind of look at the heart and how that's all beating in conjunction with the other organs. Heather, I know you probably don't have a number off the top of your head, but, would you say this is a real common problem that you see with a lot of your kids, or would you say most kids that are coming in with say ADHD or whatever else have some form of this, or what are you seeing in your office?
Yes, I mean,
sorry.
Yeah. The vast majority of them do, and it's not just the ones who are having outbursts and tantrums. We talk all the time about how it's so easy. The ones who come in and it's like, what does my child care about aside from video games? That where it is just like nothingness. It's like you're supposed to have this little dance that goes back and forth between, the immune and autoimmune function, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system that controls our organs. And kids can be escalated, or they can be in that rest and digest phase when they need to be. Come on. A little bit of we talk about anxiety, and usually we're talking about it in the context of it being problematic. Mm-hmm. We need some stress is healthy. I mean, we need times where we get worked up, and then you perform better. You're more alert. Sometimes we have kids who sleep in class, and they sleep for 12 hours at night, then they sleep in class. That also is related to the nervous system function. And of course, they might be working too hard and they're at their threshold, they're reaching cognitive fatigue, but also that is all totally related to the nervous system and organ function. When you're in a state of hyper or hypoarousal, it will impact your organ function.
100%. Yeah. I love that you brought up hypo, because those are the kids I think that skate under the radar as far as, I don't think we need to check that, right? I don't think that'd be a problem. We're not seeing, a lot of emotional outbursts, but I got really awesome, sweet little kids that come in, and they're on the opposite spectrum. They're not like fight or flight. Their other system, their parasympathetic is it's just struggling. And so they don't ever get a good balance of that sympathetic, which is typically called the fight or flight, and then the parasympathetic, which is rest, digest, and relax. And so, and I'll be honest with you, this kid, the one that stays really kind of in that opposite end of not so fight or flight, but kind of in just like a stuck rut parasympathetic state, are the mouth breathers. I have about 3 or 4 of them right now in my clinic. They breathe, they're mouth breathers. When I take their HIV, they're on the opposite end of what you might think, right? And their system's just so suppressed from mouth breathing. So I'm going to do other stuff like that. But I love that you brought that up, because lots of parents come in, they're like, okay, that kind of makes sense, fight or flight. Okay, then their sibling comes in, they're like, oh, they're cool, calm, they're never riled up. These poor kids, they're the opposite end. And so I love that you brought that up. That's so important.
Yeah. And you know what I see a lot is sometimes, and it makes sense, like if you just look at it on the surface and don't have a background in studying this, they'll say, my kids used to have major outbursts all the time, and that part has improved so much, and now they're struggling with this over here. Sometimes it's not that it improved, it's that they were in the fight mode for so long, and it's now that their rest and digest has taken over, and they don't have that variability. And it looks like an improvement because it seems easier to parent that. It's less disruptive. But then it comes to time where, man, they need to be making plans for the future. What do they care about? They don't even have goals. Sometimes, that I'm in rest and digest, like I can't, it's like their body feels like it's in a constant state of, I can't recover. And so like lack of emotion flat emotion is just as big of a deal for a lot of reasons as the hyper arousal. And I know we've said that a couple of different ways, but I think it's important to emphasize it. And what on earth, heart and brain? Well, arteries, blood flow. Yep. The reason, like we look at all of these different motor functions, and of course we're getting the kids' heart rates up and having them do all. Of course, we're checking the sensory motor system, but like why do we care about these things? Because when you're engaging your body, you are sending oxygen and blood flow and glucose, all the nutrients. The brain needs nutrients for memory, attention, problem solving, vocabulary, reading, writing, math, you name it. And if you have clogged arteries in your heart, it can also clog the messengers that help you with all of these executive function abilities.
Yeah. And, I have a study on my laptop that talks about how sensory motor function and development is directly correlated with autonomic control and function, right? So inherently when you read that, from our world, what I see is kiddos who struggle with sensory motor regulation and development, inherently most likely will have a autonomic struggle, right? Whether they're all fight or flight or whether the opposite, doesn't to me from that study. What it tells me though is that they're intimately tied together, right? And so, our kids with neurodevelopmental concerns have sensory motor issues. So that's why I'm looking at these autonomics. That's why we look at this stuff, because they're tied together. Okay. And so we know the first 6 months of life, we're all sympathetic, right? And then as the brain starts to develop, then we can suppress that full fight or flight system. And so this is really kind of a key indicator for sometimes how long has this been going on, but also just like, what are we dealing with, right? As far as not only symptoms, but behavior and just development.
Yeah. Another thing that is correlated here, that correlation does not mean cause it, but the interconnection that you're talking about is so many people have allergies. Like, well, big deal. This person is allergic to this tree. There's seasonal allergies, dust, a cat. Yes, if that's all it is, but pay attention, because if often kids who have really, really bad allergies they're more prone to then having autoimmune disorders down the road. That is showing that their body, there's a certain level at which we just got to think about common versus just not brushing things under the carpet. It doesn't mean it's something to alarm you. It is something to pay attention to at the least, because allergies also impact oxygen to the brain, but also that is an over response of the body to an environmental factor. That is a heightened state that is manifesting physically. So do pay attention to that. Yes, a lot of people have allergies. How severe are they? How many allergies are there? And there's just a really strong link between having allergies and then having autoimmune challenges later. We've had young kids, who already have arthritis. You know, I mean, that's a more extreme case, but I mean, but pay attention to those things and look for the connections, connect the dots. They're telling a story. Even if you don't know what they mean, write them down. And when you're talking to your healthcare provider, share all the things. Even it's better to share something that might turn out to be nothing than to think it is nothing and it was.
100%. Yeah. And going back to kind of the allergy thing, to add on to that, right? You know, autonomics control gut permeability, right? And so we see kids as their autonomic dysfunction continues or it's been going on longer, we generally tend to see sensitivities to gluten, dairy, other things like that, right? Because what essentially has happened is that system sort of balanced that there's the gaps that shouldn't be there in your gut. So there shouldn't be. It should be nice and tight. They're called tight junctions. They start opening up and allowing bigger and bigger proteins in. And so they start with autoimmune, like, right? Okay. Or, I mean, the kid's always sick. Those are kind of the two big ones there. You know, I didn't notice that they had dairy sensitivities until the past few months. I've been really noticing it. Or the past 6 months, they've always been getting sick. I'm thinking, okay, all right, there's probably something going on with the autonomics. But, you know, like Heather was talking about, like, you know, that's such a key thing, right? Like it's a piece of a puzzle, right? You know, like that's what Heather and I are. We're putting a puzzle together, right? And so we just have all this knowledge, and we take these symptoms and all these tests, and we're like, oh, okay, we understand this kiddo. But it's putting a piece of a puzzle together, and that's why I love when Heather brings up, you know, mentioning things or writing them down, because you're helping us put that puzzle together, right? You know, the more you tell us, the more we know, the more knowledge we have, the better our tests, you know, mean to us, because we have tangible things that we can put together. So always write it down, even if you don't understand it, right? It's not about understanding it. We'll understand it for you and help you out. But that is key. If you help us, give us those pieces of the puzzle, it helps us immensely.
Yeah. And just to keep tag teaming on this, the reason leaky gut is not just about having a tummy that hurts, constipation, right, bloating, diarrhea, those kinds of things that we think of as digestive. Understand that if these protein molecules of the food are escaping without being absorbed, you can feed your child the healthiest diet in the world, which is hard these days anyway. Mm-hmm. And they may not be absorbing all the nutrients they need that help them with clear thinking, problem solving, memory, attention, regulation. We have nutrients in our foods that help us with our cognitive functions. And then those are escaping and they're not necessarily benefiting from those. And another thing that happens is, because a lot of these kids will have anxiety or heightened emotions of one kind or another, they often will complain of, my stomach hurts, I have a headache. That may be a food sensitivity. And yes, those are also symptoms often of the emotional dysregulation. And so they get blown off, or sometimes it looks like my child's trying to avoid going to school. And that could be the case. However, don't just automatically think it is anxiety or avoidance. It might really be a digestive issue. It's not just about how many movements kids have. Are they regular? You know, sometimes they're really trying to tell you something. And sometimes on the flip side, kids don't complain of that, even though their stomach does hurt, because if it's always happened, they don't know it is something to report.
Yeah, so, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Last thing I kind of want to touch on this is if they eat something and you notice swings in behavior, and trust me, my own kids have swings in behavior, right? Okay, so I understand. We know that Chet can't have certain dyes, right? You know, and so I dread this time of year because it's Halloween when candy has dye in it, but it pushes his behavior, right? And so, you know, we know his does not process that, but typically what you'll kind of see is their behavioral change. Whether it means, you know, they might say my stomach hurts and they might kind of want to pull into themselves. They might get really, really hyper, or, you know, they just, you know, kind of, you notice some behavior changes. That's a good sign that there may be some GI autonomic dysfunction issues. And so keep an eye on that. That is a symptom that's important to tell. Make sure you share that with your healthcare provider. That, you know, that means something. Just like you parents think it means something, right? So, but yes, that's what I wanted to touch on today. I think we touched on a lot really quick, but I think we emphasized a lot of good stuff. Anything you want to touch on there, Heather?
I think just to round that out, I want to say that I've had a lot of families come to me and say, well, we've already tried that and it didn't help, like eliminating certain things that are the common culprits.
Yes.
So often it's great to change the diet. That's a great thing to do. However, keep in mind that often what is causing the food sensitivity is brain imbalance, like a communication between the body. The brain tells the gut how to process food. So without taking care of why your child has the food sensitivity, the diet alone may not do it, but taking care of the foundational causes of that and pairing it with a diet is a magic bullet. And the other thing is, when we're talking about food sensitivities, we're not talking about allergies. It doesn't mean there is eczema or something like that. Often it is exacerbation of the very symptoms that are signs of that brain imbalance, that lack of connectivity, communication in the brain or between the body and the brain. So they already struggle with attention. It takes it the next notch up to worse. Same thing with memory or any of those functions. So sometimes the things are subtle, but you add up enough of the right things, and it takes a hot minute. You can't just, you have to really give it a chance. But usually diet alone is not enough. It helps. But if diet made a difference, why did diet make a difference? Why do they have the food sensitivity? The food sensitivity is not the answer. It is another sign of underlying things going on.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I 100% agree. We do work with kids and diets and supplements and stuff, but foundationally, vast majority, high 90 percentile, the diet alone is not going to do it, right? Or it's not going to make a massive enough impact alone. You need to function, or you need to work on the neurology, and then in conjunction, if you work with the elimination or whatever else you're doing, that's when you really see it. I mean, just take off, right? And so I'm glad you brought that up. 100%. All right, that was good. Talked about a lot really quick. Heather, somebody wants to find you because they love you and they want to know more about you. And how do they find you?
At The Hidden Churn on Instagram or Facebook, or Brain Balance of the Woodlands, Katy, Mansfield, or Southlake.
And she has another podcast which you have to tune into Mondays at 2:00. Do you have one this week?
Yes. If you are thinking, I know my child is capable of more academically, there's a roadblock. They study for this test, they test poorly. We are going to talk about what is the roadblocks academically and really equip you with some very practical things that will help them with note-taking, study skills, and bringing out those executive functions.
Wow. Okay. So you definitely have to tune into that. Okay. That's big. Lots of kids are starting. We're seeing parents now saying, hey, you know what? I didn't know my kids struggled with this right now. Now that we've gone into school a little bit longer, now that there's still that stress, the pandemic stress, all that fun stuff. We're starting to see more of it now. Parents are calling us now. I didn't know they didn't struggle with this last year. Now they're struggling with it, or whatever it may be. So tune into that. Great tips. As always, Heather has amazing podcasts there. So tune in Mondays at 2:00. You need to get a hold of me, 972-387-4700. And Heather, will you be here on 9th?
Yes.
Sorry. I put that out to give any context. So that's my fault. We, Dallas Synergy Chiropractic, are celebrating our fifth birthday anniversary, or whatever you want to call it. Heather and I will be here in person. So if you've always want to meet these two rock stars, come to Dallas Synergy Chiropractic. We'll both be here. Lots of fun. Bubble truck, bouncy house, ice cream. It'll be a lot of fun. But if you've ever wanted to ask us questions in person or just meet with us, this is a perfect time. We'll both be here. We'd love to have a chance to talk with you. So October 9th, 12:30, Dallas Synergy Chiropractic. We'll both be here. We'll have to take a picture together so you can see the difference in height, right? Because it's not fair right now. Heather looks about as tall as I am. So
I'm 6'4". How tall are you?
Okay, yeah, so we're almost the same height. Okay, so all right. Okay, well, make sure you turn into Heather's pages Monday at 2:00. That's going to be a great podcast. Otherwise, we will see you here next week or at the birthday party, which is October 9th. All right, Heather, thank you as always. I appreciate you and everything you do for our communities. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.